everyone. Thank you so much for joining our masterclass. Hello, Sebastian. He is about to hop on, and we're just going to dive right on in. Hello, everybody. Okay, so today's masterclass, we're going to dive right on in so we don't waste a single minute. For everybody listening, I highly recommend you stay tuned to the very end because we have a very special offer for those of you who registered for today's masterclass. Sebastian Oreb is joining us, and I'm going to go over our top topics that we're going to be covering today, and we're going to dive right on in. So with today's masterclass, we're going to be talking about ways to achieve maximal strength gains with your clients in record time, strength-based program design for Gen Pop and your athletes. We're going to talk about why it's so important to be prioritizing strength with your clients and how that can help you grow your coaching business. And of course, ending it with talking about the king of all lifts, the squat, and how you can help your clients progress their squat strength and performance over the course of 12 weeks. Sebastian, are you ready to rock and roll?
I am ready. I was waiting to see that you could see me here because I thought, oh no, something's wrong because there's always a technical error somewhere. But anyway, it seems that we're good to go and I'm ready to go.
Let's rock and roll. All right, so we're going to start off with talking about when it comes to program design in general, especially for strength-based program design. What would you say are some key differences coaches should note when it comes to, programming for Gen Pop clients versus an athlete who may be more advanced?
I guess that the biggest difference when it comes to beginners, intermediate, advanced, elite is how much weight they can lift.
Yeah.
Now, the rules change as you get stronger. And the main rules are the stronger you get, the heavier weights that you lift, the more time you need to recover from these lifts.
Yeah.
Now that's time between sets. So a very common resting periods between heavy squats and deadlifts and compound movements for elite lifters can be anywhere between 8 to 15 minutes rest between sets. And a lot of advanced lifters use these rest times, but if you were to say that to a beginner, they would freak out. And that's for good reason, because the loads that they're lifting just wouldn't need that much recovery between sets. So this also changes the duration of the session. So a lot of elite lifters, because they have to rest for this long, their session times are usually, anywhere between 1.5 to 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Whereas a beginner training for that long, like I work with beginners who I insist on, only spending half an hour to 45 minutes in the gym at a time, because that is more than enough time to create enough stimulation to create a positive result. Whereas, so the time in the gym per session, the time that you spend resting between sets, and also the amount of recovery required between heavy sessions. So for an elite lifter doing, I've got a few lifters training at the moment. If you're following my page, you'll see last night I had a great example. Alex Simon, he squatted 380 kilograms for 3 reps, which is massive. And he's going to be resting 2 weeks before he goes for his next heavy squat session. And the next thing that needs to be considered here is the structures that he's loading with his heavy sets are the same structures that a deadlift would load, for example. So therefore, if he squats this heavy this week, we need to also consider that I don't want him to deadlift heavy this week because it's going to be too taxing on his body. So therefore, we need to change the style of periodization, especially with elite lifters as they come into competition. Coming close to competition, when they're at the really heavy end of their periodized plan, we use what I consider to be a weekly undulating style of periodization, where we go heavy week, light week, heavy week, light week. Whereas when we train beginners and intermediate, they're not really lifting loads that require as much recovery, and doing things like, squatting heavy on 1 week and then using a lighter deadlift isn't really necessary, because the loads that they're lifting doesn't require as much recovery. So this is the main differences. The techniques still apply. And, I teach the techniques for the best lifters in the world to my 12-year-old daughter. And that's because that's the way that the body moves. That's the most optimal positions for us to shift the heaviest loads as safely as possible. So technique remains the same. Exercise selection and variation, I still keep the general guidelines of working towards achieving structural balance. So I like to, in general, train the top of my body with the same amount of effort to the bottom of my body. So, upper body days, I pretty much do 2 upper body days per week and 2 lower body days per week. Um, for the exercises that train the front of my body, I do the same amount of exercise and the same amount of effort into the back of my body. So it's a very balanced approach. So that's a very simplistic way of explaining that I like to work towards achieving structural balance with all of my training, whether you're a beginner, intermediate, advanced, doesn't matter what level you're at. So these small differences, it sounds small, like, the heavier you lift, the more rest you need, essentially. But it does appear to be quite different when it comes to looking at the program. But yeah, definitely, it's not. The rules change as you get stronger.
Yeah. And so when it comes to knowing, we're talking about level of intensity too, right? Gen Pop may not be lifting as heavy as an advanced athlete, but how would you gauge as a coach if your athlete or client is pushing with the proper intensity in order to make those progressions in the program?
Yeah, absolutely. So whenever I work with anyone, we use load calculations based on initial assessments. So the initial assessments that I like to give are strength assessments with the main barbell movements, mainly because they're the easiest movements to gauge. Not because everyone needs to be doing the main barbell movements, squats, bench pressing, and deadlifting, but they're also great exercises. And you don't have to be a strength athlete to perform those movements. So in general, I'll do some type of assessment where I'm testing the strength levels for everyone that I'm working with. And then the intensities that I prescribe for everybody are very similar. When we talk about intensity, it's relative intensity. So, obviously the loads are going to change, but in general, a rule that I follow for all of my programming, regardless of how strong or how much of a beginner you are, is to start each of the programs conservatively and give yourself room to be able to progress. So this is crucial when it comes to ongoing progression. And also something that I follow very closely is training morale, enjoyment in the gym. So a lot of people, they get their new program and they see their favorite exercise and they really want to push themselves because they want to get the most out of themselves. So that's totally understandable. But unfortunately, if you go too heavy on week 1, it makes it very difficult to progress in the later weeks of the program. So whenever I write out a new program for any individual, rule number 1 is to start conservative and give yourself room to progress from week to week. There's a lot of reasons for this. 1, training morale. So if you go too heavy, it's hard to progress the following weeks. No one likes, repeating the same movements week to week and not moving forward. So you're setting yourself up to succeed if you go light and then you can go heavier every week, and that's a guarantee. But the next thing is week 1 of every program is generally a motor learning phase. So, for example, even if you're an advanced lifter, so let's just say for myself, I do a lot of back squats, and I've done lots of different squatting variations in my past, but still, because I'm most familiar with the exercise that I'm doing currently, which is currently low bar back squat in this phase of programming, if my next phase was a high bar back squat, it would feel slightly unfamiliar. Even though I've got loads and loads of experience performing that movement, I would still like to have a week of transitioning where I'm just, refamiliarizing myself with that movement. And that's just one example. The same applies to all of the exercise in the new program. Should be, have slight differences to your current program. So you start light, give yourself room to move. And I've got formulas for that as well. So I believe there's another question later on asking about how do I guarantee progression? So perhaps I can go into it then.
So what would you, real quick additional question to that, when it comes to, let's say we're just quantifying it into an RPE scale, like how would, let's say a 4-week training block or a 5-week training block, like generally, how would you say those progressions are for RPE across that training block when you're trying to quantify that?
Yeah, that's the great question. That's what I was waiting for. So essentially, there's lots of different ways so we can consider percentages, we can consider RPE, RIR. So let's do all of those now. So RPE stands for rating of perceived exertion. For those who don't know, an RPE of 10 means you cannot physically work harder than that. So you're working to your absolute limit. RPE 1 is you and I sitting here right now having a chat. We can do a lot more work than this. And anywhere in between is where we're essentially working. Now, especially when it comes to strength, it's recommended that we don't work to our limits every time we come into the gym.
Yeah.
There is a time and place for working to our limits. And if we work that way every single time, it's too hard to recover from. There's a lot of risk of technical breakdown, risk of injury. So it's definitely not recommended that we work as hard as we possibly can every time we step into the gym.
Yeah.
Even though, there's the whole sentiment of go hard or go home kind of thing, no pain, no gain, all of these things, it sounds like that's what we should be doing, but actually there's a smarter way of doing it. So if I was to score these things or quantify these values with RPE, I would say over a 4-week plan, I would say week 1 is the most conservative of the 4 weeks, and that would be the whole session would be rated about an RPE of 7. Week 2, RPE 8. Week 3, RPE 9. Week 4 is the deload, essentially. So you don't always have to deload. So there's a lot of rules when it comes to deloading. But in general, you could say RPE 7, 8, 9, deload. And I would call RPE, the deload week, and RPE 7 again. 7, 8, 9, 7, 7, 8, 9, 7, 7, 8, 9, 7, 7, 8, 9, 7. And if you were to blindly follow that protocol, it's a pretty good head start. Now, another way to quantify that is RIR, because the problem with RPE, it is quite subjective. And what you might consider to be tough, you might have a much higher pain threshold than me, and I might consider something an RPE 9 or 10, and you're saying, no, this is easy. That's RPE 7 for me.
Yeah.
So another way of quantifying that would be RIR, which stands for repetitions in reserve. So instead of doing RPE 7, you could call that a 3 RIR, which means you're performing your sets so you have 3 reps in reserve. So you're not going to fail. If you do a set of 10, you could have done 13 reps. The following week, we do RPE 8 or 2 RIR. The third week, we do RPE 9 or 1 RIR. And then the fourth week, which is deload, we go back to RPE 7 or 3 RIR again.
Yeah.
So that's two ways of quantifying it to kind of illustrate what I mean by conservative on week 1, moderate on week 2, and heavy on week 3. So essentially, with this model, week 3 is the hardest week of the program. That's when I kind of really push my athletes and push myself to really step up and hit great numbers. It's not always about hitting a PB, but if I was to hit a PB, that would be the week to do it.
Yep.
And then we deload the following week, and then we keep going. Now, remember, I always need to put disclaimers in here. That's based on a 4-week block.
Yeah.
4 weeks isn't the only way. That's very convenient because it kind of fits within our calendar month.
Yeah.
But I very frequently write out programs that are 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks. It really depends on the individual. But as a base model, 4 weeks works fantastic.
Yeah.
RPE 7897, 7897, 7897, or RIR 3213, 3213. I hope I'm not speaking too fast, but those are models that, if you're to go into this blindly or write out a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter approach, that would be quite successful.
I think it's really important too for coaches that may be listening to really get in tune with the relationship with the client and get that biofeedback. Because I do this with my own clients. My coaches have done this with me. If I'm progressing week to week with my program, I sometimes ask my own coach, I'm like, hey, can I push this one more week? Because I know I have it in me to do so. I do that the same with my clients. And although we have these templates, they're the blueprint. Your client is going to be able to dictate to you whether you need to pull it back or push it further. And you just base that off of their performance and how they're progressing week to week. What we preach, what you read about, what you study about, that is literally just that blueprint. And each client that you interact with is going to help you deviate and learn when you have to push and pull. Right? Don't you agree?
I agree with that so much, Maria. And that's the thing, is everyone is different.
Yeah.
And it's also important. So it's a really nice sentiment now from my standpoint to say, always be conservative, always leave reps in reserve and all of these things. But there definitely does come a time where we do need to teach ourselves how to push and, teach ourselves what it feels like to be working towards our limits. Because if we never know these things, it's really actually hard to progress. And sometimes, although I said you don't want to work to fail and work too hard, you definitely still need to work hard.
Yeah.
But how hard and how much effort and how we periodize effort, that's when we add the intelligence to it. But definitely we need to gauge each individual that we work with might have a much higher threshold, of pain, whereas others may have no idea that they're a lot stronger than what they're actually showing us. And sometimes they might need a push along from you or I, or or you guys at home, whoever the coach is, to say, I can see you and I can see that you've got a lot more in you and I want the best out of you. And this comes down to experience, and training intuition.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the only way to gain these things is through experiencing it. So, there's no way of teaching, you have to have a great eye for, for knowing how hard someone's working, and gauging when they're actually at their limit and whatever. This takes time and experience, and working with lots of different types of people.
Yep. And patience is a virtue. To all our coaches who are beginners in the industry, it's okay. Although it's like a bundle of information you're absorbing, know that with time, all of these things will come into practice and it'll all make sense. Now, a question to follow up on that, and this is specifically talking about client injury and especially clients that you're not coaching in person. How do you make sure your clients are pushing proper intensity without potentially injuring themselves?
So this is another reason why we do follow that scale of starting conservative with each of our programs.
Yeah.
So it does, when it comes to injuries, here's a big disclaimer. I'm not a physiotherapist. I'm not a rehabilitation specialist. I have great experience in helping people work through their injuries and rehabilitate from their injuries. But it is important to understand that we do need to stay in our lane at times,
Yeah.
or not at times, at all times. And what we do have to offer as coaches is hugely important and hugely beneficial, but it's also not a bad tool to be able to step back sometimes and say, you know what, I think I need to get the advice from a professional in this field, so a rehabilitation specialist. So I do have a team, an amazing team of rehabilitation specialists that their values align with mine, and I trust them entirely. And if there's something that's outside of my scope of works, I very happily refer my clients or my athlete onto the person who specializes in this field. So when it comes to rehabilitation, I don't want to say, oh yeah, you just gauge it by making sure that they're doing all the right things and all these things. Dot your I's and cross the T's. Make sure that you're working with the right people. It doesn't make you lesser of a person to refer out at times. And I'm sure that your clients or the people that you're working with will appreciate having an actual professional working with you in this instance. Now, failing that, I shouldn't say failing that actually, there is still things that we can do as coaches. If you aren't, like I'm sure that I'm still speaking right now in this audience, there's probably people that do specialize in injury rehabilitation. In that instance, that's amazing. But for those of you who don't specialize in injury rehabilitation, following that formula, starting conservative with your load prescription is an excellent way of ensuring that we don't injure our clients and athletes as well.
Yeah.
So a rule that I have is if anything hurts, we stop. So we don't work through pain, we work around pain. Now, the next thing that comes into play here is what does pain actually mean?
Yeah.
So sometimes it hurts to get like a massive leg burn when we're doing a great leg session.
Yeah.
That's not quite injury pain. So this is where it is important for us as coaches to be working with. So even though it's online, you can still be communicating via, video, email feedback, or however you guys do it. But it is important to stay in communication, regular communication, and always at the end of each of the sessions is to gauge how the client or the athlete felt about that session. How did that feel? Was that easy, hard? So I will always, whenever I'm working with someone, I will always make my judgment on what I think, the RPE score or the RIR score, or whatever those values are. I'll make my judgment quietly, and then I'll ask the person that I'm working with how they perceive that the session went. How hard do you think that was for you? Do you think there was more in the tank? Even though I've already made up my mind, but this is a good way of gauging the personality type of the individual that we're working with as well. Because at the end of the day, we're not working with robots. We're working with humans, and everyone is different. Everyone responds differently. And if people have a lower tolerance, a lower threshold for pain or discomfort, it doesn't mean that they can't respond. It might just mean that you might need to approach this individual a little bit more gently to achieve the same result. Can you work these people harder, the ones that have a low tolerance to pain? Yes, you can. You can gradually teach them or gradually introduce harder and harder, work levels, work rates, and tolerance to pain,
Yeah.
and achieve fantastic results. But individual differences plays a huge role in our success as coaches, and understanding that, as you said, patience is a virtue, and we do need to be patient, and there is no quick fix to this. But learning the individual that we're working with, avoiding injuries
Yeah.
by going a little bit more conservative, with each of our sessions.
Yeah.
So if you have that general rule that we never really take our clients to fail, of course we do sometimes. Remember that. Like, I've failed many times,
Yeah.
but if we were to follow a general rule, is to always be cautious with what we do. And yeah, don't be scared, or don't feel like you're inferior if you need to refer out to a professional, who it is their field of expertise.
Yeah, it does not mean anything negative about your knowledge and level of coaching. If anything, it shows your actual understanding of what your role is in that athlete or client's life, especially when it comes to progressions, injury. And I always say, that's out of scope, and then provides an expert. And, you don't have to wear all the hats. Like, you can wear the single hat that you're qualified for. And of course, create a team. If not within in team, you can do an outsourcing of that as well. And one quick note I wanted to make when it comes to quantifying, right, that push, how hard your clients are pushing with Gen Pop. If you say how was that set, I faced it was like it's fine. So I usually ask, was that light, moderate, or challenging? Right? Give me a three scale, right? Somewhere in between. Then your more advanced athletes may provide you an RPE or an RIR. So like understand that relationship with the client, so then you can kind of gauge their true like rating of how that felt, because getting a it's fine as feedback is like, well, what does that even mean, right? So like create some sort of scale that the client can understand and put their shoes in. But shifting over to talking a little bit, we talk a lot about strength, but we also have hypertrophy. What would you say are the differences between program design for strength and hypertrophy, and is there an overlap?
It's a great question, because actually strength athletes would benefit greatly from training for hypertrophy
Yeah.
at various phases in their periodized plan. And on the flip side of that, hypertrophy athletes, or I should call them, like aesthetics athletes or bodybuilders or people that train just purely for aesthetics, would absolutely benefit from a phase or two or even more of strength style of training, or getting stronger. A lot of the best researchers in our field, I believe that it's still inconclusive. There's not enough research to say you must train a certain way.
Yeah.
But a lot of the best researchers in our field, one that I like to quote a lot, Brad Schoenfeld, he's probably got some of the best research in hypertrophy today. And something that he loves to talk about, is to utilize a block or blocks of strength training before a hypertrophy block. And the idea of that is it allows you to, so it potentiates the hypertrophy phase. What that means is it makes it better. So if you train a block of strength, it allows you to develop strength and coordination of the movements at hand, so that when you go to your hypertrophy phase, you're able to work at a much higher rate with heavier loads, and have a much higher quality session,
Yeah.
as opposed to if you didn't do the phases of strength work and you don't have that level of strength. On the flip side, it's just known in the strength world and the performance world that if you want to build more strength, if you have a larger amount of muscle mass, you have a higher potential for strength gain.
Yeah.
So a tried and tested method of sports performance periodization is to utilize a block or blocks of hypertrophy before we step into the strength phases of our programming. Now, the difference between training for strength versus training for hypertrophy is, it could be said, strength athletes or strength training, strength blocks are generally less volume, less rep range, so that you can use heavier loads,
Yep.
less exercise variation, and more specificity. So strength is a skill, and if you're doing a powerlifting competition, obviously the more specific, the closer you get to competition, the more you want to be utilizing the exact lifts that you're going to be doing in competition. I say powerlifting because that's the easiest example, but there's also lots of other strength sports and even non-strength sports which require specificity
Yeah.
as you get closer to competition time. But those are the generalizations. So for training for hypertrophy is generally higher volume, generally more variation of exercise, um, and to be honest with you, I need to quantify a few other things. So a lot of people talk about a lot of research that's come about that discusses that optimal rep ranges for hypertrophy is actually a lot broader than we once thought.
Yeah.
So there was a study, or it was a meta-analysis by the Brad Schoenfeld discusses,
Yeah.
where they found that anywhere between 5 to 30 rep range uh, can create an equal amount of hypertrophy. Now, a lot of people take this information and say, well, fives is hypertrophy or bodybuilding training, and so is 30s, so we can just do whatever rep range we want.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily the case. Something that we need to consider here is training economy. When we consider the best hypertrophy athletes or bodybuilders in the world, they generally don't just willy-nilly do fives or 30s, or depending on how they feel for the day.
Yeah.
It's generally, it can be said that the rep ranges, the more stereotypical rep ranges, the 8 to 12 rep range for hypertrophy
Yeah.
is actually a great rep range for training economy. So what I mean by training economy is if you're doing really, really heavy weights with low reps, like 5 rep range, it generally takes a lot longer to recover from. So you're not able to perform as much high quality volume. And on the flip side, imagine doing a set of 30 of a big compound exercise like a squat set.
Yeah.
Like every now and then, myself and my team have done funny sets like that, but one set just doesn't suffice when it comes to long-term muscle building or hypertrophy, if that's your goal. Think of how you'd feel after doing a set of 20 or set of 30 squats. Now you've got to do a number of those sets, and is that really feasible? It's possible, but the quality of the session would deteriorate greatly.
Yeah.
Okay, so when it comes to rep ranges, although it is still possible to hypertrophy from 5 rep range and hypertrophy from 30 rep range, there is still a big difference on the way the most successful hypertrophy athletes train
Yeah.
compared to the most successful strength athletes. And those are the generalizations. More variation,
Yeah.
hitting the muscles from multiple angles. Like these are great ways of building muscle mass and using rep ranges that are a lot more economical for hypertrophy, such as, like the majority of the work in between kind of like the 8 to 12 rep range,
Yeah.
whereas strength athletes, it is said that it's generally between, 1 to 6 rep range, and it depends on the phase of the program.
Yeah.
But a lot less variation of exercise, more specificity, more skill work for strength athletes.
What would you say is the frequency of, like, let's say we're laying it out on a 12-week program. What would you say is the frequency where you go from like strength-based to hypertrophy? For just a generalization, what would you say that wave loading would look like?
Yeah, so the way that you're describing that sounds like a monthly undulating style of periodization where we switch from an intensification phase to an accumulation phase. So we can alternate from, let's go back to that 4-week model. So we go 4 weeks of low reps with heavy loads, and then we switch that to 4 weeks of higher reps with lower loads. So we go a strength phase, then a hypertrophy phase. So that is a way of doing it. We just alternate between the two forever and ever. That is a great way of doing it. But if we were to do, for a strength athlete that had a 12-week block, as you say, that was working towards peaking for a competition,
Yeah.
we would, the tried and tested, the best way of doing it. I always hate speaking in absolutes
Yeah.
and saying like this is the way of doing it, but it can be really generally said that it is a lot better to start the phase with a hypertrophy or higher volume in general, and then gradually decrease the volume as you get closer to competition. So therefore, it makes sense that in a 12-week block, the first phase would be the higher rep range, which would, working towards the goal of building more muscle,
Yeah.
as well as other things as well. So training for hypertrophy, like that rep range and the type of work that you're doing for training for hypertrophy is also excellent for developing work capacity as well. Training for hypertrophy is hard. Just because you're not lifting as heavy, it's really hard.
Yeah.
And it is great for developing the work capacity that you need to handle the demands of the later phases to come in the strength block.
Yeah.
So if you were to follow like just a typical kind of like linear or block style of periodization, the first 4 weeks would be hypertrophy specific. The next 4 weeks would be transitioning to lower reps and heavier loads. So that's a strength phase. And then the last 4 weeks, I would dedicate to peaking and pure specificity and really reducing those loads and also reducing the rep range for strength athletes.
Yeah.
The reduction of rep range, the reduction of total volume is also crucial for maximizing your levels of fitness and minimizing your levels of fatigue.
Yeah.
Because if your goal is to stand up on stage, in your underwear and to be judged on your appearance, it doesn't really matter how strong you are
Yeah.
or how fatigued you are. What matters is how you look. So it is a lot more important, like the peaking differences with periodization for hypertrophy versus periodization for strength. The peaking, the last phase would be the biggest differences between training the two. So the reduction of volume for a strength athlete could be detrimental. So the reduction of volume is great for peaking. It reduces the fatigue to maximize fitness. But if your goal is hypertrophy, that reduction of volume could negatively impact your hypertrophy gains that you've made, the cellular gains that you've made during the entire program. So that's the differences between the peaking phases. But monthly undulating periodization, as you suggested before, I love training that way, where we go, high volume phase. So that's the accumulation phase. So if we think about, I'll draw you guys, if you can visualize what I'm talking about now. 12-week block, I'd probably prefer to do a little bit longer than 12 weeks, but let's just say 12-week block. I could probably fit in 4 times 3-week blocks. And the first 3 weeks could be accumulation, where we go, 10 to 12 rep range.
Yeah.
The next 3 weeks, we do the intensification. So instead of doing, 10 to 12, we'd go 6 to 8.
Yeah.
And then the next 3 weeks, we go back to the volume. So it still can't be a really radical change, a really radical shift from really high volume, 12 rep range to heavy singles. We need to gradually. So this phase of accumulation goes from 10 to 12. The next one could be 8 to 10. And this one could, and then the intensification phase could be 6 to 8.
Yeah.
And this one could be 4 to 6.
Yeah.
So it's still, if we dismiss every second block, so if we just take out the intensification phases, there is a lot of linearity between the accumulation phases. So we gradually decrease volume over the course of the program, and we gradually increase intensity over the course of the program, regardless of the style of, whatever you want to call it, conjugate periodization, undulating periodization. That is the general trends in the majority of the work that we do, is a gradual decrease in volume so that we can essentially lift heavier loads and advance ourselves in strength through the phase.
My favorite training blocks are the low rep training blocks. Man, I can give me 3-4 reps and I can put on 4 or 5 plates on a hip thrust, but you put me at the 15 rep range, it's freaking cardio for me. But what would you say in terms of like?
But sorry to cut you off, Maria, but I love that. Like a lot of the times, like I do see you as strong, but I also see you as an aesthetics trainee. So you compete in, I'm not sure what your category is. Is it bikini or fitness?
I'm in between bikini and wellness at the moment. So next show will determine which one I end up falling in between. But
right, but that's the natural progression. Over the years of your training, you're getting more and more advanced, and this is where you're working towards.
Yeah.
So although your goal is aesthetics, you love strength work, and I think that's hugely important to your long-term progression. And I talk about it a lot, is training morale. Like, what's to say that you can't do your 3 reps and 4 reps and 5 reps? That's not going to make you lose muscle. It's not going to make you ugly. It's not going to make you anything bad. In fact, it could be the exact reason why you're motivated to come into the gym and continue to train. So something that I discuss a lot is it takes 10 years to become an overnight success. I think I say that on every single
time
podcast or interview that I have.
Anything. That's just like, you should get that tatted. That I whenever I say that. You say that every time, and I love it. I love that quote.
It is always relevant. And the fact is, what is it going to take for you to put those 10 years into your training to become good at it?
Yeah.
The main thing it's going to take is for you to enjoy what you are actually doing. Because if everything that you do to achieve your result, if you hate everything you do, the likelihood of 2 things. 1, the likelihood of you putting enough effort into that to stick to it is low. And the likelihood of you actually sticking to it is also low. So therefore, what's to say, like, even if your goal is hypertrophy or aesthetics, there's nothing to say that you can't train for the different styles of strength modalities that we use for strength athletes. And I think that a combination of both, as long as you're enjoying what you're doing, is a large key to success for a lot of individuals.
Yeah. I have Brett Contreras doing my programming, and he transitioned me to being a strong bikini athlete. And I told him after my last show, I was like, listen, I'm not changing my training to fit in a category. I'm going to fit in a category with my training the way I like it. So I'm not going to stop training
Love that.
heavy. I'm not going to not want to build muscle. Like, this is the way I love to train. And I think coaches should encourage their athletes, especially if you're coaching like competitive athletes, whether, like for physique, especially, if they have a style of training they love, that's going to end up putting their body in a certain category based off of their development. One more question for this group of questions that we have is, what is, in terms of time frame, we're talking about strength, what is a realistic time frame to expect progressions in strength? That is a very general question, but when it comes to like quantifying that, like, okay, you have a complete newbie coming into the gym or an advanced athlete, what can there be there? What is the expectation for them to be start seeing that increase in strength, even if it's as small as like 2 kilograms or whatever it may be? What would you say is that timeline, and how do you maximize?
Yeah, as you said, it's a hugely general question,
Yeah,
and it really depends on how advanced the individual is. So the rule that we have is the more advanced you are, the slower the progression.
yeah,
Or on the flip side, the more of a beginner you are, there's a term called newbie gains. So the more of a beginner you are, the
yeah,
quicker these results come. Now, the truth of it is you can improve every single time you train. And that's what we try and work towards doing. You don't necessarily have to improve and say, after one session, I can see that I've built muscle on your body, or I can see that you've gone from, 10% gain in strength in one session. That's not how it goes. But
yeah,
um, I always, whenever I'm working with people, I always work towards improving in some way.
yeah,
Now, that doesn't mean I go heavier every single session. But the fact is, the stronger you are, the longer it takes. So let's go to the absolute end of the spectrum, and let's talk about Olympic level
yeah,
weightlifters. So Olympic level weightlifters, they train kind of 4-year blocks to the next Olympics. Of course, they're doing lots of competitions in between, and they have to do qualifiers and world championships and lots of things in between.
yeah,
But in general, you could say that Olympic level athletes might do, let's just say, for argument's sake, a 200 kilogram snatch in one Olympics, and
yeah.
that's what got them the gold medal or the world record. And they will work for an entire 4 years to attempt to beat that world record by a kilogram,
Yep.
because a world record is a world record. Now, sometimes they do more than a kilogram, they break the world record by more than a kilogram. Sometimes they go backwards. They're spending 4 whole years and they don't progress at all, or they progress by a fraction of a percent. So interestingly, we talk about, I've written 12-week programs, for my ebooks where we talk about a 5% increase in strength over a 12-week period, and people complain saying, I'm not going to do this program because I want to progress more than 5% in 12
Yeah,
weeks. And it's a really interesting way of thinking about it. So for me to quantify your, a percentage increase in strength, it's actually impossible to do,
yeah,
because it really depends on so many different variables, how advanced you are, in addition to your life
yeah,
circumstances. So lots of things happen. People's health may change. So it's not just about following the program and being 100% compliant, following your nutrition plan and being 100% compliant,
yep,
sleeping 8 hours a night, getting in, ticking all of those boxes. But then we've got external factors that we need to consider, such as your relationship status, your financial status,
yeah,
your family life. All of these things absolutely contributes to our successful or not successful performance in the gym.
yeah,
And it makes all of these things, when it comes to how long is a piece of string, how long does it take to get stronger? We can improve weekly. How much do we improve? It depends on how
yeah,
advanced you are. The more advanced you are, the slower that procedure is. In general, yeah, I'm not even going to say a number. Say 10%. It takes 10% to put on whatever. A year to put on 10% or 20%. Those numbers unfortunately don't exist. I wish they did. It would make life a lot easier.
yeah. I will say though, like, and this is a hard thing because as an athlete, I see this in myself as well. But as coaches, it's really important to ground your athletes to stay in their lane, because them comparing themselves to a fellow competitor or somebody else in the gym or Joe down the street or whatever, like everybody is doing their own thing, and there's so many variables that
Mm.
play factor. It's not just the program, it's not just your meal plan. There's so many factors. Even it comes down to you comparing yourself to someone online who could potentially be taking performance enhancing drugs. There you go. That's one huge limiting factor that you might not have as a natural athlete or client. So oftentimes, especially with I predominantly train women, and they want to be very strong, and they usually compare to their spouses. Why can't I be? Well, hello, like you're completely different build than your significant other, right? So it's just really important that you're staying grounded compared to yourself last session. That's why I love following training blocks, and I encourage my athletes and coaches to encourage that as well. Because think about it, if you're tracking your performance week one, you're setting that standard for yourself. It's like a game. You're going back and you're like, oh, I'm going to beat those numbers. I want to beat my performance, my form, that tempo, whatever it may be, to quantify progressive overload. It's you versus you. And as cheesy as that sounds, that's just how it is. Um,
I love that, and it's actually it's such a good point, and it's crucial. However, unfortunately, it's easier said than done
yeah,
because a lot of people have very competitive natures, and that's definitely the sentiment that I try and teach everybody because that's the most accurate,
yeah,
and in my opinion, it's probably the best way to your continued long-term success. However, it is definitely something that I see. A lot of newcomers in the industry or newcomers in the fitness world or, strength game or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve are looking up to their favorite lifters and saying, that's what I want to be. Something that they may not take into consideration is that person has been doing it for decades,
yeah,
and you've only just started.
yep,
So this can lead to, you said the word PED. This is the ugly facts is a lot of people will turn to these things to work towards being as good as the person that they're looking up to,
yeah,
and unfortunately, they're something, I forget who it was that made the quote, but it was the fastest way to get to where you want to be is slowly.
yeah,
So, that resonates with me so much, and it's a very hard pill to swallow.
yeah,
But me, I'm 40 years old now, and I've done everything where it's like, what's the fastest way to get your squat up? What's the fastest way to achieve whatever goal it is that you want to do? And I've done lots of silly things like, training 2 times a day, training 3 times a day, 7 days a week, and beating myself up, maxing out every day in certain lifts. And, I've broken my body so many times. I don't regret doing that because I know a whole lot of answers of what not to do as well.
yeah,
Because I do get a lot of people with a lot less experience than me coming up to me saying, I want to try this method. And I'm able to guide them a little bit better because I've made those mistakes myself. But at the same time, I really wish that I didn't injure myself, trying to break myself, trying to rush the
yeah,
results. I have been told many times that, to take your time, and these things, they take, Rome wasn't built in a day. And I know that, but still, I don't care. I do want it now.
yeah,
But no matter how hard you work, it does take time to realize that is the best comparison, is to compare you versus you,
yeah.
and work towards being better than yourself on the last session and each consecutive session. And if you do this successfully, 10 years will do a lot for you.
Yeah, instead of running in circles and then in 5 to 10 years being in the same spot, right? Because you're just chasing this like instant gratification, but you end up not doing the things. And that, the tortoise and the hare, right? The tortoise ends up winning the race. Is that a story that everyone knows and is familiar with?
Exactly.
Yeah, so
I'm sure they do.
that way, right? One more question. We're going to talk a little bit about when it comes to transitioning your client from Gen Pop to more advanced athlete. And what do I mean by that? When we're talking about techniques. So how would you make that adjustment? How do you know, hey, this client is ready for something a little bit more advanced? And what is that? What does that look like when it comes to like program design?
It's actually, before we go into program design, I probably need to touch on mindset and availability of time to allocate towards
Yeah,
being advanced. So that's something that a lot of people don't actually consider,
yeah,
and it's a pretty difficult one. But as I said before, the stronger you are, the more advanced you are.
yeah,
The longer it take, like the longer these sessions are. So when it comes to the strength world, a lot of the highest level strength athletes train for a lot longer than an hour and a
yeah,
half. My sessions go for 2 hours, full stop. They go for 2 hours. The reason that I stop after 2 hours is because I'm hungry, and I want to eat. But otherwise, sometimes I still don't actually get my entire session in. It's not because I do so much work.
Yeah.
It's because I'm resting for so long in between my sets
Yeah.
that it just takes that long. Now, how many people have that much time to allocate towards their training?
Yep.
And it's not just that much time to allocate towards their training. It's to allocate towards their recovery and every other part that comes with it. So it's
Yeah.
an absolute commitment to be an elite athlete. Like I work with a lot of people that may not be as genetically gifted as other people, but they have the time, the determination, and the work ethic
Yeah.
to be advanced, and they make themselves advanced. Like there's people that I work with that don't have all of those advantages, but they've just put the effort in, and they've gotten to outstanding results. So a lot of the times, before we think about the programming principles to become advanced, or how do we transition, it's how do we? I could get a beginner that comes to me and says, "This is what I want to be. I want to be high level." Well,
Yeah.
that's the mindset that I need to work them towards believing and understanding is how much time is actually it actually takes. It can be quite selfish. It can be quite lonely. And that's what I do know about competition at the highest level is all of the successful athletes that I know have amazing support teams around them,
Yeah.
whether it's their spouse, whether it's their coaches and a team of whatever it is surrounding them. And if they don't have that, it's a huge disadvantage. I don't want to say it's impossible because there's some phenomenal athletes that aren't married or don't have any of those things. But in general, it's a very selfish game. It's a very lonely game, and it's a very time consuming game. So there's that. But now, because you did want to, the original question was about the programming principles. It
Yeah.
is generally over the long term, as you're getting stronger, the rules change. The fact is, you're not just getting stronger. Like in year one, you're going to be a lot stronger. In year three or in year five, you're going to be even stronger. Of course, that's the case. But we don't get there in a straight line. We
No.
fluctuate. We peak and we recover. Then we peak, then we recover. Then we peak, then we recover, and so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
during all of these, the peak phases will always be reducing our volume, and then we'll always be increasing our volume as we're further away from competition. And that kind of goes on a constant loop. But, in general, if I was to work with an absolute beginner, I could, one of my favorite styles of periodization is monthly undulating periodization, because this style of training doesn't take you too far away from any of the modalities that we're working towards. So another way of saying, high volume, low volume, high volume, low volume is high volume, like we associate that with build muscle. So we build muscle, and then the low volume is when we're building strength. So we get big, get strong, get big, get strong, get big, get strong, get big, get strong. Now I can do this, as a general rule for a lot of the beginners to intermediates that I work with,
Yeah.
until of course, becoming more advanced means you're most likely working towards competing in whatever it is, whether it's a team sport or a strength sport or whatever it is. And then I would change the structure of my periodization to a longer term plan where it's instead of going up and down like this, I'll kind of go, in general, I'll do, more set out phases. So higher volume, then gradually decreasing the volume,
Yeah.
slowly but surely, over a longer period of time. The longer the better. People say, how long should a periodized plan be? Well, how long do you have to allocate? 8 weeks
Yeah.
is probably too short. However, I get a lot of professional athletes that come to me and say, I'm competing in 8 weeks' time. Make me
Yeah.
stronger, make me better. And it's like, well, I got to make
Shit.
the most of what we have here. So, there's never really a best case scenario. Well, there is a best case scenario, but whether or not that's followed is a totally different story.
Yeah, and I appreciate you doing the preface to that question, because I do think sometimes it gets overlooked when your clients are very ambitious at the beginning. They're setting goals, regardless what range of whether they're beginners or advanced, intermediate, doesn't matter. They're ambitious, they're excited, they're motivated, and sometimes they forget to be realistic about what effort they're actually able to commit to and put in every single day, not just when it's convenient, not just when it's easy, because most of the time it's not going to be easy, motivated, convenient at all. So I just think that as coaches, you have to serve as that, it's that tough love where you have to be realistic with, okay, if this is your goal, this is what you need to do in order to reach it. are you able to sustain that daily? If your life does not allow you to do that, then maybe we have to readjust the goal, or at least readjust the timeline and be realistic. So you're not, doing false promises just to promise some things to lock in a client. Your client's going to stay with you longer if you're being real with them, because they're going to end up trusting you more and knowing that, hey, thank you for being real with me, instead of starting it and then failing and then they get discouraged and it's just like a spiral. You want to be real with your clients. um, shifting into talking about
Perfectly said.
yeah, shifting into talk about the king of all squats. I mean, the king of all lifts, the squat. The squat, squat, squat. We see you repping squats. We see your beautiful daughter repping strong squats. Let's talk about, why is it so important to improve your squat performance and strength for clients, for athletes, for coaches? Why is it so important?
I'm not sure if important is the best word for this. Last week, I just want to say I had a client, an athlete of mine, that I've taken squats off their program because they're not suitable for that movement. This is a beautiful woman whose job is, she's a model, and she's her goals are purely aesthetics based.
Yeah,
And as a model, she's very tall, and her proportions are very different to mine.
yeah,
She has long femurs, short torso, deep hip sockets, and when she squats with the barbell on her back, she's not doing anything really conducive to building the muscle mass around the areas that she's working towards.
yeah,
So I asked her the question: are you squatting because you want to be great at squatting? Because if she was, then I would say, let's keep squats in your program because you want to be good at it, you enjoy it, and that's what's going to give you the training morale to continue to train. And that's my number one objective, is to find something that the person I'm working with is going to want to stick to and put enough effort in for long enough to be good at it.
yeah,
Now, with this individual, she didn't care less about how strong he was. She didn't care about the squat, and I just took it off her program. The best movements for her were unilateral exercises or machine exercises to build the target muscles, which is, glutes, hamstrings, quadriceps. I took squats out altogether. However,
yeah,
in my experience with working with the types of people that are drawn to me, so there's no secret here. I love strength. I lift heavy weights, and I train people to be really, really, really strong.
yeah,
And so I, although I have a huge bias, I'm also, in my own bubble where the people that are attracted to what I do also like this type of lifting as well. So those are the types of audience that come to me. And so it's very easy for me to say, hell yeah, everyone loves squatting. Well, everyone that I'm around loves squatting,
yeah,
but the reality is, not everyone loves squatting. Some people hate squatting.
yeah,
But in my experience, I believe that the squat is the king of exercise. This is heavily biased for good reason, because I have seen people achieve amazing results with their
yeah,
squats. I've seen people achieve amazing results with their long-term health with squats because of their desire to be good at something
yeah,
in the weights room in particular. Like, some people don't compete, but they want to be, as funny as it sounds, people want to be good at lifting weights.
yeah,
Even though you're not competing, it's like, even though it should be you versus you, we still are exposed to things like social media, and there's a lot of competitive, influencers out there that may not even be competitive, and we see what they're lifting, and it's like, you know what, I want to do those things as well. I want to be that strong. I think that's really cool to be able to achieve that. I want to be able to do a body weight squat, and then a double body weight squat, and then for those who want to venture beyond that, a triple body weight squat is absolutely possible. And I've got a lot of athletes that I that can perform triple body weight squat. But for me, in my early days, I would have thought that was impossible. But these are exercises, like, in my opinion, there's nothing really that can be performed in the gym that's quite as cool as someone putting a really, really heavy barbell on their back, sitting all the way down and standing back up again. That's really cool. But other people, might look at that and say, like, I don't know, I don't see the point of that. That's really uncool to me.
yeah,
However, what are the results that we can achieve with this? We can achieve great overall body strength. We can achieve great aesthetics because of the target muscles that we are developing in general, the lower body, the legs, the core, the glutes.
every-
It's great for sports performance. It's great for training morale, if you love doing these sorts of things and having that sense of self-achievement,
Yeah.
this is why I've spent so much time in mastering, the intricacies of the squat, the program design for the squat, the techniques that we use to be able to shift the heaviest loads, because the results that I get beyond, how it makes you look or how heavy you can squat for the day is the long-term success that it brings in terms of, making people want to stay at the gym and keep coming, keep turning up to keep improving themselves and do it for years to come. So that is why I have a huge bias towards a squat, even though you don't have to.
Yeah, and again, it goes back down to what your client's goals are. I do think that, each coach has their bias on like fundamentals in a program design or fundamentals in exercises. But if you try it with a client and it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You swap it out with something else. Now, to follow up with that, when it comes to just squatting overall, is there a huge difference? And you can, go into that a little bit more versus, like, for example, free weight squatting to Smith machine squatting to machine squatting, like a hack squat. Talk about like the differences amongst those. And do you see similar benefits of just the squat movement pattern, even though, for example, if you have a client that maybe just technique is not their thing and they're online and they cannot master that free weight squat, shifting them over to a more stable environment like a Smith or a hack squat or a machine squat?
So, coming from a strength-based coach, you would think that I would be more towards, saying Smith machine or hack squats are, that's what we steer clear from and all of these things. But I don't have that view. The longer I've been in this industry, the more open-minded I have become, the more I've learned, the more I realize what else was out there besides, as I said, my little bubble.
Yeah.
But the fact is, if your goal is to be good at squatting, yeah, machines, Smith machines, hack squats may have a carryover. But if you want to be good at squatting, you need to have the balance to be able to control a barbell free in space. And this also carries over towards total body strength and strength related to, sports. So, whether it's a team sport or a strength sport, doing the free weight variation is a lot more beneficial than the
Yeah.
machines. However, if your goal is purely aesthetic, I don't have a problem with machines. In fact, I would go as far as to say the idea that they take less time to master the movement means that you don't need to spend. So the body goes through a phase when they're performing a new exercise of motor learning. Once you develop the neural adaptations required to master the movement,
Yeah.
that's when the body. So you can come in as a newbie. A lot of the adaptations are neural. So a newbie might come in. Let's just say be able to squat 10 kilograms. Then the next week they can double their strength, and be able to squat 20 kilograms and then 30 kilograms and 40 kilograms. Like they haven't doubled their strength. They haven't gotten stronger by that much. They've just developed a little bit more
Yeah.
coordination. And this is the neural gains that they have achieved. They haven't necessarily changed their body physiologically or on a cellular level. They haven't necessarily built muscle
Yeah.
from week 1 to week 2 to be able to, squat twice the amount that they did on week 1. So the same applies for even more advanced
Yeah.
lifters. As I said, with changes of program, we start with the more conservative load so that we can familiarize ourselves with the movement. The higher the complexity of the movement, the longer that phase is of neural adaptations before we move over to cellular adaptations. So therefore, it can easily be said, based on that it is more beneficial for cellular gains, cellular adaptations, to use an exercise with lower technical complexity.
Yeah.
Therefore, machine squats, it could be said that they're better for hypertrophy than free weight squats. Not saying that free weight squats are bad for hypertrophy, it just takes longer to learn.
Yeah.
So does that mean either is right or wrong? No, they're different exercise for a different person for a different phase in their programming. I don't actually own a Smith machine. This is the gym that I train in every day. I own it. It's my own studio gym, and I don't own a Smith machine, mainly because it takes up too much room, and I'm limited on. I would love to have every piece of gym equipment in the world, but I don't have the space. Therefore, I don't have lots of different exercises, and a lot of people see it as, he doesn't train that movement, so therefore he doesn't like it. No, not necessarily. It's just there's only a certain handful of exercises that I can actually do in a day,
Yeah.
and I wish I could do more, but I just don't have the time or energy to do it. But would I do a Smith machine squat if it was available to me? Yeah, probably. Um, I still prefer, I'm a competitive athlete. I'm a competitive powerlifter. And if I want to be good at squatting, I need
Yeah.
to be good at squatting. I need to practice the free weight movement.
Yeah.
Um, but even from someone who trains for performance, hypertrophy, as I said before, when it came to the question with hypertrophy versus strength,
Yeah.
strength athletes benefit greatly from hypertrophy
Yeah.
phases, and I would absolutely use a Smith machine or a hack squat or a leg press for my hypertrophy
Yeah.
blocks, but then transition to the free weight
Yeah,
variation.
and I'll use myself as an example too. When it came to preparation for my shows, I did back-to-back shows, and my recovery wasn't as great. And I did have free weight squats in my programming, and it just got to the point where I wasn't able to progress with my free weight squats, and I was compensating form, and there was not that recovery, so I would not perform it to the proper technique. So because my goal was a physique goal, and I was in a deficit, and I was in that fat loss phase, and my biofeedback was down the drain, it was swapped with a hack squat. So then I am more stable, which is more, it is preferred for hypertrophy. You don't have that many directions of force, right, to stabilize, where when you're with a free weight, you can go in any direction, right? So when you're in that more stable environment, you can isolate and focus more. So there is that time and place. Now in my off season, with all the calories that I'm having, I am relearning. I'm reconnecting the neurological connections on how do I perform a squat again? Because it's been so long, and just doing it because I enjoy it. Like you said, having that morale of like enjoying that training. If your athletes or clients don't enjoy it, you don't have to push it. But if they're like, I want to challenge myself because it is such a challenging lift. You can speak on this as well when it comes to squats, deadlifting, bench pressing, even hip thrusts. They're huge lifts and they require a lot of technique and a lot of practice. And it could be a goal of, that is an advanced movement. Even though you and I and everybody listening squats and deadlifts thousands of times throughout the day when they're doing things around the house. You're sitting down, you're picking things up. We all do it, right? Maybe not with the proper form, with the, how we would do it in the gym, but we all do those movements. But when it comes to doing it under heavy loads, it's a difficult movement to master.
It is difficult to master. I've been practicing for 20 years and I still have not mastered it yet.
Yeah,
It's something that I always say we work towards perfection, even though we will never achieve
yeah,
it. And that's something that I always encourage for all of my lifters is to every session record all of the warm-up sets,
yes,
all the way to the top sets to make sure that you're doing all of the, you're correcting your form as you go. Like even me, I've been doing it for 20 years and I still need to,
yeah,
like every session I come in and the form is it's far from perfect every single time. But a point that you raised that was so important for people to understand is that with the various phases of your training, a lot of people continually want to progress,
yeah,
whether it's with their strength or progressively overload somehow to continue to get better. One of the biggest problems that I see when it comes to training for aesthetics is that phase of calorie deficit, that phase of leaning out, which is important. Um, it's it's very difficult to progress in strength while that is happening. So it can be hugely discouraging to come into the gym and continue to try and add weight to the bar week after week as you're getting lighter in body weight. Not only is it discouraging, it's even dangerous
yeah,
because you're losing. Yeah, the goal is to lose fat mass, but unfortunately, you lose muscle mass as well, and you lose strength as a result of that, and therefore it's impossible to get stronger. So the shift from different exercises can be the training morale benefits that you need
yeah,
to stop yourself from hating training because I hate it when I can't progress every
yeah,
week. So when it's important for aesthetics competitors or aesthetics athletes to understand that during your deficit phases to disassociate your progressive overload with you progressing. So you don't need to add weight to the bar every time. And if someone's in a calorie deficit, in fact, I recommend you don't try and go heavier every time.
yeah. And again, it's the goal and the time and place and the athlete and client that you're training. Now, one thing when it comes to the squat, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of ankle and hip mobility. How important is ankle and hip mobility? And then to follow up that, can it be a limiting factor to your performance progressions of your athlete with the squat specifically?
It definitely can, and it also depends on the type of squat that you are trying to achieve. So, ankle mobility is a lot more important for, say, a weightlifter who needs to squat at a much greater depth than a powerlifter.
Yeah,
So, to achieve full depth in a snatch and a clean and jerk, they're essentially squatting until their hamstrings are pressed firmly against their calves. And to be able to achieve that, they need great ankle mobility. And some people structurally just don't have that. And when I work with athletes that don't have the structural mobility to achieve these positions, I recommend that they keep away from these sports.
Yeah.
And in general, kind of we veer towards the sports that our bodies are better suited for. So the top level sprinters, they're kind of designed that way, and they figured out during their childhood years that they were faster than everyone else because they had the right proportions
Yeah.
and the right mechanics, and then they stuck to it, and they trained it because training morale. They loved being better than everyone else, so they put more effort into it, and they got even better. Same with weightlifters. There's a lot of athletes that you know they can't achieve those positions, so they quit because you need to achieve. You need to have great ankle mobility, hip mobility, shoulder mobility, overall mobility to hold a barbell overhead in a full squat
Yeah.
position, which is a snatch. Um, and if you don't have that mobility, then you just won't get good enough,
Yeah.
and therefore you probably won't enjoy it. Okay, so that level of mobility is important for a weightlifter.
Yeah.
For a powerlifter, there is, I've worked with powerlifters that have very little range of motion in their ankles, and you don't need a huge amount of ankle joint
Yeah.
dorsiflexion to perform a powerlifting style of squat.
Right.
As long as you have the hip mobility
Yeah.
to stand with an open stance and push your hips back, and that position looks, it's more of a vertical shin angle because there's less forward knee progression. And it doesn't mean that they can't do it. It just means that they need to modify the position of their movement so that they can. So the thing is with powerlifting is you don't need a huge amount of mobility to achieve powerlifting positions. A lot of people ask me the questions, like they probably see me squat with my hands from end to end of the barbell. Like I use a really wide grip, and people say, shouldn't you be using a close grip for squats? And it's like, yeah, this is my close grip. I've just got very poor shoulder mobility. And people say to me, do you think you would be better if you had better mobility? And my answer is no. Like, I'm as mobile as I need to
Yeah.
be for my sport. And the fact is, you don't need to be that mobile to do these sports. So, um, back to the question, do you need good ankle and hip mobility for squatting? It depends what type of squat you want to do, depends what sport you play. And um, I would move towards playing the sports that you are mobile enough
Yeah.
for. Otherwise, you're not going to have a great time. So like I said before, with the model that came into the gym that I recommended, she moved away from squatting. The first question that I asked her was, do you want to squat? Is it important for you to have a good squat?
Yeah.
The fact that she said no, it made it a very easy decision for me to say, don't squat then. But if she said yes, she's trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. And I would have still helped her because my job as a coach is to help people achieve their goals. At the same time is the tough love approach that you discussed. We still want to be real with
Yeah.
our athletes and our clients. So I would still recommend, look, this is the difficulties that we're going to run into. However, if you have the patience to work through it and try and figure out a way that we can stand and position our stance and hips and torso angle to achieve a squat, I have the patience to do it, but it's probably going to be a little bit more difficult than someone that does have the right proportions for that movement.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's hard as a coach, especially when you're coaching online clients, is that it may be hard sometimes to see the actual structure of your athlete. And if you have them, facing when they're doing their check-in photos, you can kind of see the length of their limbs to kind of have you estimate of how they're actually going to be performing the squat and how their form is going to look. But when it comes to like your hip and ankle mobility, is there a place for room for improvement? And if you are to encourage improvement in ankle mobility or hip mobility to the point where you notice that's actually limiting them to perform the squat as just properly, what are some ways that you practice that hip mobility or ankle mobility that athletes can do and coaches can implement for their athletes? Or do you just reckon that you work with what you got and work on improving that?
Yeah, so there's structural mobility. So if you have your hip joint, it's a ball and socket joint.
Yeah.
If this ball is the femur. So that's your thigh bone. The head of that thigh bone is the head of the femur that sits in the socket.
Yeah.
Now, some people have very shallow sockets, so they have great range of motion. And these individuals are generally great at hitting great depths with their
Yeah.
squats. But then you have other individuals that have much deeper sockets, which is a lot more stable because a larger percentage of that ball articulates with this socket. It's a lot more stable, but it's a lot less mobile.
Yeah.
And these are the individuals that struggle to achieve certain depths. Now, if it's a structural mobility issue, we can't push them, we can't improve their mobility. We can't push them
Yeah.
to a position where it's bone on bone and they're just getting jammed
Yeah.
in that position. So it's important to identify if that's happening.
Yeah.
And if we try and work beyond that, we can be definitely causing a lot of damage.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are things that we can do to see. I'm not. That's not part of my game is to assess people's hip structures and their mobility restrictions and all of these things. To an
Yeah.
extent, to a large extent, I can help with the techniques that I provide. So the stance that I use when I talk about squat stance, I always say it's unique to the individual. How do we know what's the right stance? It's called trial and error, and we determine this as we are warming up with unloaded, completely unloaded. And these are the assessments that I'll have. So I'll tell all of my individuals, and I'll help them if I'm standing there, determine changing their stance to toes out, toes in, toes straight, feet feet wide, feet close, and all of these different variations to determine the optimal stance for that individual. And what I consider to be optimal is one where they are able to achieve good squat depth and maintain neutral pelvis position and a neutral spine position before we start to load that
Yeah.
individual. Now, I something about mobility, the difference between mobility and flexibility. I'd say I'd say the main difference between the two is flexibility is able to take your limbs to an end range, but you can't passively. Mobility is the ability to do this actively. So to have strength at these end ranges is mobility. So a lot of the times people are hugely flexible, but they can't hit these end ranges because they don't have the strength in that end range. So sometimes it's a matter of the rules that I have with squats is to go as deep as your mobility allows,
Yes. Okay.
right? So that might mean that you can't go ass to grass or full depth or powerlifter style depth in your squat, but I'll still work towards the individual's end range of motion because a lot of times they say that there's a carryover. I think it's 15 or 30 degrees on either side.
Yeah.
So if we call this parallel depth and the individual can only squat to here before they start rounding, I'll take them to here. And as they develop strength, they've got an additional 15% of range of motion carryover that they're strengthening. Even though they're only strengthening to this range of motion, they're still strengthening 15 degrees beyond that. So simply performing the movement with the correct technique. For those of you who don't know what the correct technique is, obviously I teach it in all of my SSIC courses.
Yes.
We go into great depth with technique because it's hugely important for your success. But if you wanted a quick crash course on squatting technique, I've got a video tutorial link in my bio that is absolutely for free.
Yeah.
The way that I teach this squat allows people to position themselves in a way to maximize their own mobility. And that's the recommendation. Squat as deep as your mobility allows. In time, people's mobility improves with strength in that position.
Yeah.
And that's my recommendation.
Social media is infiltrated with the ass to grass or else it doesn't count. And, I used to struggle with that when I first started training, and I used to power lift when I was a youngin'. But when that was the issue for me was I was always told, you got to go lower. You got to go lower. My hips, I physically cannot. And when I pass a certain point, I feel excruciating pain, and it just didn't work out well. And it got to that point when I realized that, and one, it's my mobility, but also the way my hip and bone structure is. And I've had it assessed and we've looked at it, and I'm like, can you help me improve it? That's just the way it is. So it's oftentimes where you see these coaches that are like, if you're not hitting depth, didn't count. Well, not for everybody. It's not the case. Everybody is a different body. And obviously, there is a marker. Like when you have competitions, right? If you don't hit certain depth, it doesn't count. But there's a difference in that. It's like like you mentioned, the way you're setting up, the way you're performing it, it looks different for everybody. So there is a marker of like how to do proper technique. And like Sebastian said, it is across a lot of his courses. We have the ultimate squat course, link in his bio for the video tutorial. But again, it will look different for everyone. And the more you see it, the more you practice it, as a coach, you'll be able to pinpoint those differences amongst your athletes and stop pushing your athletes to have like the same uniform look for their squat. When it comes to, oh, go ahead. Did you want to say something?
I was going to say, I think that a lot of the times when we have these discussions, I also assume a lot of knowledge. Something that I failed to mention was a tool that I use for assisting squat depth is elevated heels.
Yes.
That's going to allow for artificial ankle joint dorsiflexion, which will allow for greater depth in a squat. So that is a tool that I use, whether it's with a squat shoe, a weightlifting shoe that has an elevated heel that is inbuilt. Alternatively, standing with your heels on a weight plate is also a great option. Just for those of you who didn't know, but that is absolutely a thing. And a lot of the highest level squatters in the world use elevated heel weightlifting shoes so that they can achieve depths. But like what Maria said, if your hip structure doesn't allow it and things just hurt, you don't need to force yourself to
Yeah.
squat just because you read somewhere on the internet that it doesn't count if you don't go ask the
Yeah.
grass.
And when it comes to improving your overall squat performance, yes, practicing the squat will help you, progress the squat. What would you say are some other exercises that you prescribe that can indirectly or directly help you improve your performance with the squat?
Yeah, so there's a lot of training principles that we need to follow.
Yeah.
So we have specificity. We also have variation. So if you're just doing the same pattern day in, day out, you're not really including any other variation. There's a lot of joint angles, muscles, and ranges of motion that we are neglecting to build strength in.
Yeah.
So there is no such thing as one exercise that strengthens every muscle and every part of our body. And if you do, then you're going to have a lot of weak points. And it's weak points that can either get in the way by, an injury later on down the line, or, if you have an aesthetics goal, like you can see what these weak points are because you've got, in general, less muscle in that area. And if you're a bodybuilder or a competitive figure athlete, you're judged on these things.
Yep.
So there's no such thing as one exercise that does it all. Variation is important. Like, how often do you include these variations? We need to be intelligent with how we structure these
Yeah.
variations. Like, for example, I don't say, squats 1 week and then trick the muscles and go sprinting the next
Yes.
phase, because that's a leg exercise as well. But, shock the body into growth. That's not how it works. The variations that I include are very minor adjustments so that the motor learning phase of each program doesn't interfere with our continued progression. So basically, it might be a change in stance by going a little bit wider. It might be a change in bar position, going from high bar to low
Yeah.
bar. These small, but, when I say frequent changes, I say usually, depending on the length of the program, we can say 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, we can change
Yeah.
exercises. We don't have to change every week. In fact, I recommend you don't change every week because you need to, in my opinion, you should be repeating the workout so that you can improve on that workout, so you can progressively overload. Otherwise, if you're randomizing your workout selection, there's no such thing as progressive overload. You've got nothing to measure it
Yeah.
against. So therefore, an absolute minimum of 2 weeks for a program, or two consecutive cycles of a program, um, is a minimum, but I still don't recommend
Yeah.
it. If I was to write out a program for someone, my minimum would be 3 weeks, and I generally go up to about 8 weeks in length, but in general, I say about 4 weeks. So that type of training variation, so gradual changes in your squats, and the way that I also make my progressions is as I'm further out from, I don't want to always say
Yeah.
competition. It could just say, like I always, even if you're not a competitive athlete, I still set goals for certain
Yeah.
dates. giving my clients or athletes something to work towards achieving. Otherwise, if you're just training, aimlessly, I hope I get better one day kind of thing, it's hard to stay motivated. So I'll always set dates, whether it's 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, 20 weeks, or whatever it is. Like, let's achieve this. If you squatted 100 kilograms, perfect. The next goal is 120. When's a realistic time frame that we can achieve that? Let's do a 12-week program. Let's do a 16-week program, and let's hit it at the end of that. So in general, when I think about the variations of exercises that I choose, I use the most difficult exercise first, and then gradually move towards exercise changes that allow the lifter to shift heavier loads. So therefore, I'll give 3 exercise examples: front squat, high bar squat, low bar squat. The front squat, they're all great exercises. I don't want to say any is better than another because they all have their pros and cons, but the front squat is the hardest to lift the heaviest loads. So therefore, I will do that first. Then the next exercise that it's a little bit easier to shift heavier loads, but still not the easiest, is the high bar squat. And then the exercise that allows us to lift the heaviest loads is the low bar squat. So I will generally choose exercises in order of, front squat first, then high bar, then low bar. What that does is, as I was talking about with conservative load prescriptions, where we go conservative, moderate, heavy, deload, that allows us to guarantee that we're going heavier every week by going conservative, moderate, heavy, but also changing the exercises from hard to moderate to easy allows us to also guarantee that if we do front squats first, we're definitely going to go heavier on our next phase because we're doing lots of things. We're changing to a more mechanically efficient position, but we're also reducing reps. Okay, so from a training morale standpoint, I've gone from, just for argument's sake, 10s in a front squat, 6s in a high bar back squat, and then 3s in a low bar back squat. So these are things that I can guarantee from a training morale standpoint. I guarantee you, anyone who I write that program for will go heavier every single week from the start of the program till the end. The variations in there, I'm not saying that those are the variations that you have to use, but that's just a great example. Something else that I talk about as you get a little bit more advanced is understanding that a lot of exercises, as I said before, there's no such thing as one exercise that trains every muscle. But something that I do want to work towards is achieving structural balance and having no weak points. So squats, they call that, a bang for your buck exercise because it's a big compound movement. And I absolutely agree. But there are muscles that we're neglecting. There's certain heads of the quadriceps that we are neglecting, as well as other muscles opposing. So hamstrings, squats are a terrible hamstring exercise. I'm not saying the hamstring's not active, but it is. If all you do is squats, you're probably going to have weaker hamstrings. So we need to include accessory exercises to ensure that we're developing hamstrings, we're developing quadriceps, and all of the muscles and ranges of motion that we've neglected in the main movement. So there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all approach because, the way that one person squats because of their femur lengths and proportions and mobility restrictions might have a very hip-dominant style of movement. So when one individual squats, it could be great for things like, glutes and adductors and erector spinae, whereas another person performing the exact same exercise that you've written on the program that has better proportions for a squat, it might be a fantastic quadricep exercise and an even better glute exercise. So just because you've got 2 people doing the same exercise doesn't mean they're achieving the same result from that exercise. So there's so many variables that need to be considered when it comes to continued progression. But though in general, those are some rules. Obviously, with rep ranges to get heavier and heavier, if you reduce reps, it's going to allow you to lift heavier weights. So we start with higher rep range in general, and gradually over the course of the training block or the periodized plan, we reduce volume so that we can increase intensity. And we also, my approach is to use exercises that are harder to achieve heavier loads and gradually change the mechanical advantage of the movement. So each exercise progressively gets easier. They're 2 great tools to allow for continued progression, which is great for training morale, and it's also, great for our strength
I
development.
think one thing you've said in the past too is a strong athlete is a well-balanced athlete. And I think that oftentimes that can get neglected, right? When you have someone that wants to improve a certain area, they think they just have to improve that area. Well, when it comes to things like compound lifts, your athletes and clients may truly benefit from working and developing all areas of their strength. Because the minute you start neglecting something, you will start seeing it show up into stalling your progress and progressions through performance through all movements and lifts. Um, Now, one of
Perfectly said. So that's, it sounds like, oh yeah, we just got to train everything. Everything should be strong. It's like, it sounds too
yeah,
simple, but actually, that's exactly what it is. If we have a muscle that we've neglected or a range of motion that we've neglected, we may not see it now, but later on down the
yeah,
line, it's going to show up as that weak point is it's exactly what's stopping us from
yeah,
progressing. So that's what I always look for when we have, you know, when we train our quadriceps, there are four heads of the quadriceps. When we train our hamstrings, there's three heads of our hamstrings. Like, I want to hit every one of those muscles from every angle. It doesn't have to be in the one session, but over the course of the periodized plan, that's something that I consider is, we've got a great debate that's happening currently is Brett Contreras. He's posting a whole lot of amazing information on the way that we approach glute training to maximize our development in strength and
yeah,
muscularity. And he talks, what I love about his approach is he's not demonizing any exercise, saying that's bad, this is good. It's kind of like, you know, we've got end range. So we've got training the glutes in a stretch position. We've got training the glutes in a short position. Which one's better? It doesn't matter which one's better because you have to do both.
yeah,
And that's just one small facet, one small example of his approach that I love. And it's the same approach that I love with what that I take with my
yeah,
training there's no such thing as one exercise that's going to be the best. Like, there are exercises that may be our favorite, but it doesn't matter. The beauty that we have is the ability to use variation. When someone says, should you use this style of deadlift or another? It's like, why not both? We have the leisure of being able to use both. And that's not just, squats or glute development. It's for our whole
yeah.
body. We can use variation and we should use variation. We can train our muscles in a short position. We can train our muscles in a lengthened position. We can do both, and we're going to get a better result if we do
Yeah,
both.
I think it's important as coaches to really understand and be part of that movement that doesn't demonize movements and makes people afraid of movements. Like, if it works, it works. You have your client try it. If it doesn't work for them, great. Guess what? There's thousands of exercises and variations out there. There is not the must-haves. Sure, there are staples, there are movement patterns that we should include, but I think we've gotten to the point in the industry where it's just a lot of like, don't do this, 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 and then you have Gen Pop going into this and being like, well, what am I supposed to do then? Right now, it's like, I have no idea even what now I have to do. And they don't understand these things. So, as coaches, I am a firm believer that, like you said, you should be doing them all. Whatever works for you, works for you. If it doesn't work, guess what? There's heaps of other options. No demonizing movements, okay? People like, we're not part of that movement. Um, one more,
Totally, and also no demonizing training modalities either.
yeah,
So to say that you must squat or you must do it, or there's a movement out there saying that squats are bad, and barbell movements are bad and free weights are bad. Well, it
yeah,
depends. It can't be bad for everyone. If that's what is making you enjoy your training and love training to be able to stick to it for the 10 years,
yeah,
then it's far from bad. It's amazing. But to demonize training modalities, not everyone has the same taste in exercises. And as I said before, the different proportions that people have make them more suitable for different movement patterns. And therefore, if they're more suitable for it, they enjoy it more. We can't tell people what they enjoy or don't enjoy.
yeah,
So, it's just totally not helpful to come out there and say, all of these exercises are bad. These training modalities
yeah.
suck. No, they don't. You may not enjoy it, but it doesn't mean that someone else doesn't have to.
Like, the basics work, the foundations work, but it doesn't mean that you can't have fun with your training and add fun things and like just enjoy yourself. Training should be enjoyable for you as a coach, for your clients. Like,
Yep.
having the variability is fun. Like, can we bring fun back into the training too? We're going to shift over to talking a little bit of, as we're coming towards the end of our masterclass, I do want to take some time to talk about coaching business and what you leverage strength to propel your coaching success and career. Talk to us a little bit about how you managed to do that with your career and why it was so important for you to use strength to propel you to the success you have today.
I kind of went against the grain with this, if I'm being totally honest with you. I loved strength training. It's what I was good at, and for myself, so I was strong. I am strong, And I attracted a lot of athletes that also had similar goals to me, and they also wanted to get strong. They watched what I did with myself and with the people that I was training, and they wanted some of that. And I was very lucky that that happened. But I actually had a lot of mentors as well that I was approaching to help me improve my business as well,
Yeah.
because that's a large part of what we do. Is, yeah, cool. It's really admirable to, just to want to help people. We do, of course we do, but at some point we need to get paid, because we've all got bills. We've got mouths to feed. We've got roofs over our head, hopefully, and this all costs money. So without money, we can't do what we love,
Yeah.
actually. So for those of you who don't factor in business, I think I highly recommend that you should. So I had a number of mentors in my time, and I was advised back in the day that, for a good start, this was in the very beginning of my career. The recommendation that I had was to ensure that I have a fat loss component to my business, because if I
Yeah.
don't, I'm going to be missing out on a very large audience and a large chunk of money making
Yeah.
potential. And that still could be right, but I mean, if I'm sure if I did, I'd reach a whole new audience. I don't know how good at it I would
Yeah.
be. To be honest with you, it's definitely not my passion. When it comes to nutrition, of course, I understand the value of eating properly, of eating well, and understanding nutrition. I understand its
Yeah.
role in health, in performance, in aesthetics, which is the three main reasons why we train in the
Yeah.
gym. I understand its importance, but it's just not my passion. I would rather, do my thing, eat my thing that works for me, and refer out. So work with other nutritionists to achieve that facet of my business. So, something that sounds very cliche is to follow your passion. And lucky for me, I did, and it worked. So it wasn't that it is crucial to do strength to improve your
Yeah.
business. It's just what I loved doing. I loved, and I knew how to get strong. I knew how to motivate people. I knew how to stand behind someone or stand with someone in a session. Mainly, I have to say, one of the biggest reasons for my success in being able to achieve results in the people that I've worked with is the fact that I've done it before. I've spent so many hours under the barbell. As I said before, I've made so many mistakes. I've injured myself so many times. I've pushed myself trying to achieve goals that are just not achievable in short periods of time, and had to learn really, really harsh realities. And this is what allows me to be able to empathize with the people that I work
Yeah.
with. So the advice that I give people is hugely valuable, not because I've read about it or someone told me that this is the best way. It's because a lot of the stuff, majority of the stuff that I teach is stuff that I've
Yeah.
done firsthand. I know firsthand, even working with some of the strongest athletes in the world, uh, you know, they look up to me, they respect me, because they know that I know what it feels like to get my body under, 3 times body weight squat. And I know what it feels like to go down and up with that weight. I know not just what it feels like for that split second, but the months and years it takes to train to be able to achieve those things.
Yeah.
So, this is as cliche as it sounds. I followed my passion. I got here. I follow a lot of successful businessmen that have businessmen and businesswomen, business mentors that have nothing to do with the fitness
Yeah.
industry. And I hear a lot of, people saying, following your passion is bullshit. At some point, you need to not necessarily love what you do, you have to do it anyway, kind of thing. And there's a little bit of truth behind that, as ugly as it
Yeah.
seems. But at the same time, that's what I did. Is the reason why strength worked for me. Firstly, I was passionate and I was good at it. But in my opinion, from a training morale standpoint, I was able to explain this type of training in a way that resonated with my audience, with the people that work with me, to allow them to love strength as much as I love
Yeah.
strength, to want to do it for a long enough time to be good at it. So from a training morale standpoint, this is where I keep on coming back to. Being able to love what you do is where you are going to
Yeah.
succeed. For me, when I first started training, I trained, with the bodybuilder mindset. I wanted to build muscle. I wanted to look amazing and all of these things. Um, and although I think it's a great way of training, I just stopped enjoying it. So I stopped being good at it. I lost my passion at it. And I was very grateful that I found a strength coach who came to me. He worked at a fitness first where I worked at. His name is Jeff White. He was a strength coach for a professional rugby team. And I was intrigued by the idea of strength training. So I employed him as my coach. He introduced me to strength, and I was hooked ever since. So what I found that I loved about it, I was able to teach to my audience and have them love the same things. And that's where, I attribute my success in building the business, is teaching people or helping people work towards what they actually love doing.
Yeah.
Um, and that's all I can say. If you love doing the fat loss game, the calorie counting, the macronutrient tracking, if that's what you love doing, you're going to be passionate about it. And the way that you teach it, it's going to be visible that you're passionate about it, and you're probably going to attract that audience. Um,
Yeah,
so as cliche as it sounds, that's the secret to my success, was living it, breathing it, loving it, and teaching it.
I did also pick up on what you were saying in terms of like making sure you are also or have practiced what you preach. I think it's really easy for clients and athletes to look up to you, right? And knowing that you've been through what they've been through. You've been through that comp prep, that whether it's for a stage, whether it's for powerlifting meet, whatever it may be. You've been through like their similar challenges, maybe not the exact same, but you've experienced those things. And think about that, like as a coach, you can now be empathetic and you understand that and you know how it feels to be in those shoes, and they know that you have been, and they trust you with like, I know you've been through this and I know you can help me go through this. I think that's one thing that can be sometimes tricky when you haven't experienced those things. It's a little bit of a roadblock for you. Now, it doesn't mean, for example, you trained the strongest man in the world. You maybe weren't as strong as him, but you had the same principles and foundations, and you've tried it, and it was obviously tailored to you and your progressions and your peak and strength. But you were able to use that and train the strongest man in the world when he was able to achieve that. So I do think that it's important to, at some point in your career, to have practiced that and do whatever you are doing when you are coaching as well.
Agreed.
Yeah. And now, one of the other things I had as a question was more so of, why is strength so important? What are the benefits of, pushing strength for your clients and getting them strong, whether it's Gen Pop or an athlete, whether it's a teen or an elderly person? Why is strength so important?
So, I'm not going to go into some of the statistics. I've read and spoken to a lot of people that believe it's one of the most important health markers to be strong, and it's actually something that determines how long we live, is our levels of strength and our levels of muscularity. Whether there's truth to that or the studies are bunk or whatever it is,
Yeah.
it suits me just fine. I love that idea, but I absolutely do see the importance of strength for a lot of health reasons as well. For example, my grandfather just passed away, but before he did, he was a fit, strong man up until the age of his early 80s. And then, he lost a lot of motivation in life to do things, and he stopped doing anything. And this is one of the biggest problems with getting old. A lot of elderly people, they don't go anywhere. They get a little bit
Yeah.
miserable and they lose a lot of purpose, and then they just die slowly.
Yeah.
And that's what I saw happen with him, is like he was strong and muscular, up until the age of 80. But then all of a sudden, when he stopped using his muscles, his legs were smaller than my forearms,
Yeah.
and he didn't have the strength. Like if he fell over in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, he couldn't stand up, and
Yeah.
he would need to, call an ambulance to come to just to help him stand up again because he didn't have the strength.
Yeah.
So that's at one end of the extreme in favor of being strong for your health, and that's at the end of your life. But there's a lot of evidence that works towards, women, menopausal women losing bone mineral density, the benefits of strength training to help us not to do that and to maintain bone mineral density. This is important for our strength, for our health. Um, you know, Injuries from a rehabilitation standpoint, it is more often, a failure of our whatever the tissue is from it's being taken beyond its capacity due to strength. So whether it's a tendon, connective tissue, or bone, it's been taken beyond our capacity, and therefore it breaks or tears or injures itself. So
Yeah.
this can be avoided through strength as well. So from a rehabilitation standpoint, having a strong body is going to allow us to have a much greater quality of life.
Yeah.
That's, obviously I told you the most extreme variations, like elderly falling over
Yep.
and not being able to stand up, or even, things like breaking their hip. A lot
Yeah.
of hip breakages. This was a funny statistic. A lot of hip breakages end up in death because they lose the motivation to continue after that, and they end up just dying. Like, it's a really sad statistic. But let's go on a more positive note and talk about, in our early years. And of course, I'm going to use my daughter as an example. My daughter is 12 years old. She's incredible in the weights room. She's lifting weights that we've got a female only community upstairs, and a lot of the girls upstairs always come down and they kind of make comment to me saying, I was trying to keep up with your daughter today and she's stronger than me, and that's motivating me to get stronger. And these are, grown adult females, trying to keep up with my daughter. And I tell her, and it's hugely flattering for her. She's 12 years old, squatting and deadlifting over 60 kilograms, which is great. Is great for her age, especially. But a lot of adults aren't doing these things. But what it does do for her is when she goes towards playing any sports with her peers, she's she has the strength to have the coordination to learn a lot of skills a lot quicker than the other students. So she's great at picking up new skills beyond the people that don't have the strength to be able to do it. So interestingly, technique is hugely important for
Yeah.
learning all skills, but you need a certain level of strength to be able to perform certain
Yeah.
techniques. So from a skill development standpoint, early on in someone's life, having a certain level of strength is hugely important. I don't want to say it's you know you have to
Yeah.
have it, but if you don't have it, it's going to be a lot harder. So for me, like, it doesn't matter how you look
Yeah.
at it. I think, from the very first days, like, uh, uh, from absolute babies, the first thing you should do for a baby is give them tummy time, which is where you lay them on their front and have them lift their head so that they can develop the strength in their posterior chain to eventually crawl, then eventually walk. So strength development from day one is crucial up until your final days as well. So I don't know. You can pick a scenario, pick an age, pick a goal, and I'll tell you why strength is important. Of course, I have a huge
Yeah.
bias, but I do think that my bias is for
I
good reason
think
as
it's
well.
really funny when you mention like, and your daughter started lifting at a younger age. She didn't just start lifting this year. I coach a lot of
Yeah.
pre-high school teens as well. And one of the key things I see, when I onboard them or bring them on for the first time, it's the parents like, I don't want them lifting heavy. I don't want them to hurt themselves. I'm like, have you seen how heavy their backpacks are? Like, have you tried lifting them when they're carrying those textbooks? And more likely, they're not using proper form to pick it up, right? So it comes to that point of educating. When if you are working with minors and children, whether they're school grade children, high school children, regardless what your niche is, it's just important to spread that education. Even honestly, all age ranges can sometimes find that hesitancy, especially in the gem population. In terms of like being scared to lift heavy because of whatever they've perceived, whether that's like they don't want to injure themselves, they don't want to get quote unquote bulky, whatever it may be. And I think it serves a great purpose as a coach to educate your clients or the parents of the clients that there is a benefit in adding muscle mass, maybe not just for physique aesthetics, but just for overall health. And think about, I think, this is my own bias. I do think that as a population, especially here in America, with obesity being one of our largest problems and of health, I think everyone can benefit from adding a little bit of muscle mass, because what it takes to build some muscle mass can really help bring down those numbers. Now, obviously, that is a multi-level issue. I just think there is a place for everyone to help increase their strength. And you added the flip side to that. My grandparents in Europe and Bulgaria, they don't go to the gym, but my 90-year-old grandma is hiking it alone in her garden, and she's with her pickaxe and gardening. Her sons are like, no, we'll hire someone. She's like, absolutely not. Like, she's out here with a heavy pickaxe. That's what's keeping her mobile and moving, and movement is key. And I think whether it's strength, exercise, whatever it may be, everyone can benefit from that. And I love that you may be biased about it because that's your career and passion, but I honestly think it's across the board. Everyone can benefit from that. Look at us getting all deep about strength. um,
But it's an important topic, and I love that whole idea, just the picturing your grandma with her pickaxe in the backyard. But absolutely, the fact that she has purpose in life, and the funny thing is to have her children and grandchildren saying, "I'll do that for you." Unfortunately, that takes purpose away from them, and people need purpose,
yeah.
and I think strength strength gives people ability to do things, till their last days. And
Yeah.
anyway, we'll talk about the benefits all day long.
Yeah, and I honestly think, with today's conversation, we touched upon very, tons of golden gems. If anybody watching us right now live has any last minute questions for Sebastian, you can pop them into the chat. Now, if you stuck around, I do have a special announcement for you guys. For those of you who have registered for our masterclass, you will be having an exclusive offer sent to your emails, but I will tell you about it right now. You will be getting 40% off Sebastian's complete strength system international certification through Clean Health, and it's valid for 48 hours only. So once this recording is put up, unfortunately, that offer will be ending. So it's 48 hours after this masterclass is over. You could use the promo code Sebastian40 to save. Again, you will get an email about all of this. And, Sebastian can touch briefly on what you can expect from the complete certification level 1, 2, and 3. But there's 12 modules, 170 lessons. It's everything you need to know when it comes to optimizing your strength progressions for clients and using that to help propel your career as a coach. But Seb, would you like to give our listeners just a brief expectation of like what to expect from the complete certification?
Absolutely. Whenever I design any of these courses, I try and think about however many hours of education is going to be, and how I can condense, my 2 decades of working and living and breathing in this industry, into the most usable format, so that, one day of education can be the best one day of learning the most practical applications to strength training that's
Yeah.
available. So the very first thing that I talk about, the very first lesson is lifting technique on the main movement. So I always say, if you're, a lot of people that are after the perfect pill, the ultimate training program, I say if your exercise technique sucks, your training program sucks, even if that program was written by me. So therefore, the first thing I do, the first lessons I teach is based on lifting
Yeah.
technique. Then after that, basically, I talk about the science of all of the training variables that we need to be doing in the gym. So it's like, we've got lifting technique. Okay, great. Now I go to the gym. Now what? What exercise do I do? In what order? How many of them do I do? How hard do I
Yeah.
work? Well, that's what's broken down in all of the courses. The science of reps, sets, frequency, tempo, exercise selection. We then talk about all of the different movement patterns and the muscle groups that we are
Yeah.
using to perform these movement patterns. So there is a large component on anatomy. Anatomy is a tedious topic that I've tried to make a little bit more entertaining through body paint, so that you have a more visual illustrations of where these muscles
Yeah.
are. It's very hard to learn anatomy just from reading a
Yeah.
book. Um, Unfortunately, you're still not able to feel and touch on these courses, because the only way you can do that is with a cadaver model or in
Yeah.
person, which we didn't have access to. But when it comes to training, it's essentially everything that I teach. That was always at the forefront of my mind, is how do I achieve results, the best results, with the time that we have. So essentially, each of the courses kind of doubles in information. So I think the first course is about, I don't know, maybe about 2 days worth of work. The next, so SSIC2 is double that. SSIC3 is double that
Yeah.
again. So there's a lot of great information. Um, the beauty of this information, as I said, 1 day, 2 day, 3 days, it can be done at your
Yeah.
leisure over the next 12 months if you like. So you can do it as quickly or as slowly as you like. You can also repeat it, refer back to it at any time. You have access to it for 12
Yeah.
months, which is a huge advantage compared to doing any of my workshops in
Yeah.
person. Something about my workshops in person is once it's said and
Yeah.
done, and you're out of there, then it's done. You can't come back to it and refer
Yeah.
to it, which is unfortunate. But this is recorded. Now, everything that I have recorded, I've made sure we have amazing research teams that we've worked with to make sure that they've essentially fact checked all my bullshit, to make sure that what I am teaching you is not only current, but it is also correct. Yes, I do have my biases, but it is also backed by
Yeah.
science. Um, and thanks to the amazing team that I have access to at Clean Health, we were able to put this in 3 levels of competition, of education, as well as the squat course, which was kind of like a final
Yeah.
edition, which was supposed to be a quick and easy course, but I got a little bit carried away with that. and we ended up making a larger
Yeah.
production. So that's a very low entry point
Yeah.
course where I teach all things squatting when it comes to technique, the different variations of squats, who should be doing them, and not just the way that we'd learn it from a textbook. I give demonstrations of actual athletes at the highest level, and I show the differences between the body proportions, the type of squat that they're doing, and how it presents from lifter to lifter. So all of the courses that I used isn't just about academia. It's not just about reading from a textbook. It's about real world application. I teach people where I've learned this information from, how I've used this information to apply it on myself and my own athletic performance, as well as on my highest level athletes to achieve the results that I've achieved every day, which include amazing results from beginner, intermediate, through to literally the strongest man on the
Yeah.
planet. So if that's the type of thing that you're into, like I am, and I'm sure
Yeah.
Maria you are too, then these courses I highly
Yeah,
recommend them,
I
of
will
course.
say if you guys enjoy Sebastian's master classes, you will be in for a treat because he is hands-on teaching everything in these modules and certifications. And I myself took them, and I truly, truly believe that having that visual aspect alongside of it is next level up on top of a textbook. It's one thing to read something, it's another to actually see it. And I do think that you have that benefit where each level goes more and more in depth. It's like you peel one layer and you have another and another, and it can really help equip you with the tools you need to propel your success with your clients. I've used it and I've seen the benefits, but the one key thing I need to say is there's one thing to take the course and it's one thing to apply it. So make sure you are practicing it. Now, also, quick note, we are going to be having these master classes frequently, so keep your eyes open for future dates so you can enroll. Encourage your friends and coaches to join us because like Sebastian himself, Clean Health, and myself, we provide heaps of free education. There's lots of it out there. You just got to take advantage of those resources. I do have one quick question from a student named Tim. Like we have like a minute or two. Let me just drop that in before I say goodbye to everyone. Tim said, "Hi Seb and Maria, thank you very much for your time. Just wanted to ask about programming variations. Would you program a variation and the main lift during the same block?"
Definitely. When we think about the different exercises that we do, like let's just say a common thought is to use anywhere between 10 to 20 sets per muscle group or per movement pattern per week. So if I was to do, let's just say squats, barbell squats, I'd very rarely do 10 sets of squats or 10 sets of, or even 10, 20 sets. So 10 sets is kind of like a really great amount of volume, but it's still not a high amount of volume. Like working up to 20
Yeah.
sets per muscle group is really excellent. And yeah, I absolutely quite often, I'll use multiple variations. So using the squat as an example, I like to consider that different types of squats emphasize different
Yeah.
areas. So two examples that I can use to illustrate this is a low bar squat is considered to be a hip dominant
Yeah.
variation. Now, what I like to do with my accessory exercises is I consider the joint angles, ranges of motion, or muscles that I've neglected in the main movement and train it in the secondary lift. So it's a quite common approach for me to do like low bar squat, competition style is my main
Yeah.
movement. And my secondary exercise, I've neglected, it's a more hip dominant movement. So I'll think of what's more knee dominant or quad dominant. So then I'll use something like a sissy squat at one end of the spectrum, or even like that's really, really quadriceps
Yeah.
dominant. Or even I could just use something like a front squat or a high bar squat, which is kind of like it is still a compound movement, but there's a lots of rules behind using so many it's called compound
Yeah.
overload. You can get to a point where you're just doing too many compound movements, and it's too stressful and it's too difficult to
Yeah.
recover from. So therefore, we need to alter some of the other variables, such as in particular the load that we are using. So if we're doing low rep heavy low bar squats, I might do slightly higher reps with more tempo. So we're using a lower
Yeah.
load, and so it's lesser impact on the body for recovery. So, low rep heavy low bar squats as the main exercise, and high bar pause squats for the secondary movement. So it's a lot lighter movement, but we're targeting the muscles that we neglected in the main movement. So that's one example of the approach that I take. But to answer your question simply, yeah, you can definitely use multiple variations, but we still consider we have a main
Yeah.
priority, And then we have the secondary exercises that are performed with lighter loads, and we always have to take fatigue into
Awesome.
consideration.
Thank you so much for squeezing that last minute question. Thank you to everyone for joining us live. Again, don't forget you're going to have your 40% off the complete SSI certification. You can use Sebastian40 at checkout to redeem that. And keep a lookout on your emails. You will get that special offer as well. It is valid only 8 hours after this live. So if you're watching this replay on our platforms, it is not working or valid for you, but make sure you're staying tuned for our future masterclasses. Sebastian, it is always such a pleasure to chat with you. You are like a big mentor to me, and I'm very grateful to learn from you and be able to chat with you and share your knowledge with everyone who joins us always. So it's been such a pleasure.
Maria, it is always a pleasure chatting with you. I always love the personality, the energy that you bring. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for hosting the day, and I can't wait till we do it again.
All right, bye everybody. Thanks, Sebastian.